Mediators are actively seeking to seal a ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas within this week to allow for essential aid for civilians in Gaza. So what are the prospects of a pause in fighting? What is the importance of penning a truce before Ramadan? And what endgames are pundits envisioning for the Israel-Hamas conflict? Efforts to hammer out a truce deal between Israel and Hamas continue against the odds as civilians in Gaza endure the brutal brunt of the armed conflict. For more on this, I have Professor Park Hyondo at the Sogang Euro-MENA Institute live on the line. Professor Park, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
I also have Professor Mehran Kamrava at Georgetown University in Qatar with us. Professor Kamrava, it's been a while. Welcome back.
Thank you. It's good to be back.
Professor Park, last week, US President Joe Biden spoke of a potential ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas early this week. What do you believe was behind his relatively optimistic outlook?
Well, frankly speaking, the President Joe Biden has been always optimistic. He talks a lot, but the action, we need real action. You know, it seems to me, for me, it is really preposterous that United States is talking about the ceasefire and carries out airdrop of aid while it has been arming Israel to continue its military operation and causing a huge number of the civilian casualties in Gaza. So the words don't cut it. I mean, we need action right now.
Right. Professor Kamrava, there have been calls about the importance of a ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas before the Islamic holy month of Ramadan. Why is this the case?
Well, Ramadan, as you know, has special significance for Muslims the world over. It is the holiest month in the Islamic calendar, and there's a whole series of rituals, including most notably fasting, that Muslims engage in during the month of Ramadan. And so it is critically important for people to be able to engage in those activities, do their communal prayers, engage in fasting, and then have access to food after sundown, food and water after sundown and before sunrise. And so I think it's critically important that there be ceasefire, but I quite agree with Professor Pike. It's 4 months too late. We've now surpassed 30,000 Palestinians who have died. Tens of thousands more lives have been shattered, and I think the need for ceasefire is urgent and immediate.
And that being said then, Professor Park, what appear to be the main issues of contention in sealing a ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas?
I think it is more like a temporary ceasefire or permanent ceasefire. I mean, right now, the 6-week truce deal is on the table, and United States actually made it very clear that now the ball is in the camp of Hamas, whether Hamas accepts the 6-week truce or not. And according to the report, Israel endorsed the framework for a Gaza ceasefire and captive release deal. But the Hamas has been demanding a total ceasefire and the withdrawal of Israeli troops from Gaza. But Israel does not want to put an end to the conflict. And all they need, Israel is talking about only temporary ceasefire, not permanent. That is the big gap between these two. And also, the Hamas likes to see the truce must be the beginning of a process toward the ending the war altogether, which Israel does not accept.
And amid this dispute, Professor Kamrava, what are your thoughts with regard to progress on penning a truce deal between Israel and Hamas before the start of Ramadan, which I believe starts on the 10th of March? Is that correct, Professor?
Yeah, that's correct. The precise date of Ramadan is either the 10th or the 11th. And there's, religious scholars debate that, Islamic scholars debate when the new moon is seen. But at any rate, I think what's critically important is the need for ceasefire. coming to your question, there have been negotiations, as you know, and discussions here in Doha, in fact. But those and also in elsewhere in Cairo and in Paris. But those negotiations, we have quite different perspectives on the pace and on their fruitfulness. On the one hand, the Israelis appear to not be as keen, and as my fellow panelists just mentioned, the Palestinians really would like a permanent ceasefire and a process. But it appears that the Netanyahu government, for its own domestic political purposes, is quite reluctant to make substantive progress towards a ceasefire.
Professor Park, staying with the Netanyahu government, last Thursday, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu shared with his cabinet a number of proposals for post-war Gaza. Now, among them was the idea of Israel maintaining, and I quote, indefinite free military operation in the region. How do you respond to this idea?
Well, I don't think it is a good idea, actually. But Israel has been talking about indefinite freedom to operate throughout Gaza in the name of preventing any resurgence of Hamas terror activity or Islamic Jihad activity. And actually, Israel has been asserting two key goals. First of all, one is actually securing the release of all hostages still held captive in Gaza. And secondly, the dismantling the Hamas and Islamic Jihad. Well, you can actually, maybe you can dismantle Hamas and Islamic Jihad, but the idea of resistance, the idea of resistance for the unjust settlement and also the injustice inflicted on the Palestinian people would not go away. So I think the temporary system, whether it is a temporary or permanent, right now we need a ceasefire, and then we need to progress, actually talking more about the possible political solution for the conflict. Otherwise, it will be a never-ending story. Always this vicious cycle of the conflict will go on and on and on.
Right, and speaking about potential solutions, Professor Kamrava, what potential endgame do you envision with regard to Israel's military operation in Gaza? And which endgame do you suppose will ensure some kind of lasting peace in the region?
Unfortunately, as we all know, we haven't had peace in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict for the last 100 years, and I don't envision that scenario anytime in the near future, quite tragically, I must add. But I think each side has its own vision of the day after. Quite frankly, right now, it doesn't appear that Israel has a clear vision, or I should say the Netanyahu administration has a clear vision of what it wants to do with Gaza. It has started a quagmire, and I think, as Professor Park just mentioned, the idea of resistance is not going to go away. So the Israelis have floated various ideas in terms of having some sort of permanent military presence, having the Palestinian Authority from the West Bank come and govern Gaza, or have a multinational force govern Gaza. We have 2 million people in Gaza. It's not an easy place to govern. And moving forward, there will be lots of broken lives that need to be mended. And I think in terms of what will happen to Gaza, that's quite a vexing question, and we'll have to just wait and see how history unfolds in the coming weeks and months.
Right, we do. And in the meantime, Professor Park, back in January, I believe, Israel accused a number of workers at the UN Relief Works Agency of involvement in the October 7th assault in southern Israel. Now, this prompted the West to halt its donation to the agency. What are the broader implications of this latest event?
Well, the problem is that there is a lot of assumptions that actually the United Nations Relief and Works Agency workers actually participated in the brutal assault on the October the 7th. That is the claim made by the Israeli side. But the thing is that we don't have any tangible evidence. Actually, the many experts, actually, also the workers and the organization asks actually the Israel government to provide tangible evidence that the workers participated in the attack. And a lot of verbal words between actually organization and Israel, and still we could not find any good tangible evidence, the proof. This is the main point right now.
Right, I see. Meanwhile, beyond the region, Professor Kamrava, Israel has pledged to provide Ukraine with early warning systems. Could you tell us a bit about these particular systems and how do their supply look to perhaps affect the broader global standoff among major countries?
I think this is more of a symbolic gesture on the part of the Israeli government towards Ukraine to express its profound displeasure at Russia's stance in the war. You know that Russia has voted for ceasefire repeatedly in the United Nations. It recently hosted a Palestinian delegation. And of course, Russia has joined the chorus of global condemnation of the mass killings, the massacres, ethnic cleansing, and genocide in Israel, in Gaza, committed by Israel. Of course, Russia hasn't used the word genocide, but it has committed the mass killings. And this is much more of a symbolic act by Israel. It's a little late in the Ukraine war, but it is an early warning system in which a voice comes out and announces incoming missiles. And it has, of course, tangible consequences for protecting civilians, but it's not necessarily going to change the equation in the Ukraine-Russia battlefront.
Right. Meanwhile, Professor Park, what has been South Korea's official stance with regard to the conflict between Israel and Hamas in Gaza?
It is quite rare, actually, for South Korean government to make any statement. But last October, when the president of the Republic of Korea met with the Crown Prince of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, both sides actually made a very interesting joint statement where South Korea actually asking the no targeting civilians and emphasizing the importance of protecting civilians and obeying the international law and international humanitarian law, and agreeing to work with the international community for the rapid and unimpeded delivery of humanitarian assistance to suffering civilians in Gaza. And what is really interesting is that Korean government made it very clear that South Korea highly appreciate the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia's leadership in the Arab Peace Initiative, the two-state solution that was proposed in 2002 at the Lebanon, the Arab League Summit. So the Korean government has made it very clear the Korean government does not actually the Korean government denounced the Hamas attack, but at the same time we highly appreciate we highly appreciate human rights. So which means that Korean government is basically putting pressure on Israeli government in this sense.
And Professor Park, this is an impromptu question. You mentioned the two-state policy as a possible solution, of course, to the conflict between Israel and Hamas. Speaking purely as a scholar, what are your thoughts on the possibility of a two-state settlement to the violence in Gaza?
Well, as Professor Kamrava made it very clear, it is very difficult to actually anticipate any two-state solution in the meantime.
Right, I see. And Professor Kamrava, you as well, your prospects on a two-state policy, is that very slim then?
Absolutely. Unfortunately, in 2016, I wrote a book called The Impossibility of Palestine. Back then, Palestine was impossible, an impossible dream, and today it's even a more distant dream, quite unfortunately and tragically.
Right. Moving beyond the conflict then, Professor Kamrava, generally speaking, what are your thoughts on the policy of deliberate ambiguity as adopted by a country amid the world's current climate of geopolitical uncertainty, if I may?
Well, in the world of diplomacy, many countries in certain circumstances prefer not to adopt clear and well-defined positions. And so deliberate ambiguity is a policy that has often been adopted. For example, we all know, just as an example, we all know that Israel has a nuclear weapon, but deliberately there's been this ambiguity. Israel has never denied it. It has never confirmed it, although at the beginning of the conflict, a couple of Israeli ministers, one actually, came out and said we should just nuke Gaza. And so deliberate ambiguity is a policy that is often adopted in order to evade having to take a clear position on certain issues.
Right, but hopefully with regard to the violence in Gaza, we'll have a clear stance in the near future then. All right, Professor Kamrava, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts. And Professor Park, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you.
Right, well, that is all the time we have for this edition of Issues and Insiders. Thank you for watching. See you same time tomorrow.